If you look at the wealthiest nations on Earth, most started with a geographic advantage. They possessed vast reserves of oil, deep veins of gold, or millions of acres of fertile farmland. Then there is Singapore, a tiny island sitting near the equator that possesses no natural resources. It lacks even enough naturally occurring fresh water to sustain its own population. How did a country with no physical assets manage to become wealthier per capita than nations hundreds of times its size? Singapore's trajectory suggests that geography is not destiny. Its leadership operated on the principle that physical resources are not the only foundation for a modern economy. To understand this shift, you have to look at the starting point. In 1965, Singapore was abruptly expelled from Malaysia. This was the birth of a nation that foreign diplomats expected to collapse within years. The internal situation was desperate. The new government inherited a deeply divided population, massive unemployment, and square miles of dilapidated housing. Survival depended on attracting foreign investment, but the island had nothing tangible to offer. There were no raw materials to export and no large domestic market to sell to. They were attempting to draw global capital to a volatile, impoverished island that could not guarantee a return on investment, a seemingly impossible hurdle. Prime Minister Kuan Yew realized that if Singapore lacked physical resources, it would have to manufacture an intangible one: reliability. Because the island only had its people, the government began treating the population as its sole natural resource, shifting massive amounts of state funding into targeted education. The curriculum was designed with precision, prioritizing science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and global languages. These were the specific skills global corporations actually needed to expand. This approach took a fractured, unskilled population and developed them into a unified workforce of problem solvers. By training their citizens to specifically match the requirements of global business, Singapore created a high-value labor pool that functioned as their first major economic asset. But a skilled workforce cannot thrive in a corrupt system. In many developing nations, the risk of bribery and unstable leadership scares away the very capital those countries need to grow. Singapore responded with an absolute anti-corruption policy. They established a culture where no one, regardless of political rank or business influence, was above the law. While punishments were severe, the state also addressed the incentive for graft. They increased the salaries of government officials to attract top talent and make the cost of corruption professionally ruinous. This enforcement of the rule of law became a primary marketing tool. It gave investors the certainty they needed to commit billions to a country they could trust. Since Singapore couldn't compete with larger nations on physical scale, it chose to compete on speed. They built hyper-efficient infrastructure, kept taxes competitive, and developed automated, world-class maritime ports to ensure that goods moved through the country without delay. For global leaders in finance and shipping, saving time is often more valuable than saving money. A reliable port and a fast business setup reduce the cost of doing business. By removing the friction from international trade, Singapore became the essential gateway connecting the economies of the East and the West. However, external reliability is impossible to maintain if a nation is unstable internally. The government invested heavily in affordable public housing, clearing the slums to house the population in safe, modern high-rises. By turning the majority of its citizens into homeowners, the state created long-term social stability. When people own their homes, they have a personal stake in the country's continued success. This housing policy ensured the economic gains reached ordinary families, providing the domestic peace required to keep foreign investors confident in the country's future. Today, the results of these decades of discipline are clear. Singapore has one of the world's highest GDPs per capita, its safest streets, and a passport that grants access to almost every corner of the globe. But this success comes with new challenges. Life in a hyper-efficient system is expensive, and the pressure to remain competitive has created an intense, high-stress environment for its citizens. The country now faces the task of innovating to solve the problems its rapid growth created. Ultimately, Singapore's wealth was not extracted from the earth. It was systematically built through vision, education, and the strict enforcement of trust. The lesson Singapore teaches the world is that a nation's most valuable resource is the confidence it inspires in others. Geography may provide a head start, but trust is what builds a future.